What's good, YouTube? And welcome to the house. Today I want to talk about something that's been bugging me just a little bit, and that's the disappearance of budget decks from the top cut of almost any competitive event at all. You look at regionals, you look at YCSs, where are they at? They've completely fallen off the map. So I want to kind of backtrack back to where budget decks kind of disappeared. Where did we lose them? When were they last seen? I pay a lot of attention to the top cuts, as that was a large part of the channel before. I did dueling book screens a lot, and I noticed the watch time, even when I would put the tournament report and the words of the duels, matchups by round, shoutouts, all that stuff. Only 50 seconds of watch time per video when we would include all that. So one out of over 10 people would just click on for the list and click off. I didn't feel like that was great content, but I do enjoy putting the duelist out there and hearing their story, and we'll still do that pretty much any day, especially with the more interesting lists. But those seem to be kind of fallen out. Like, we did have Saryuja Turbo just, take London by storm, but it's not the most budget deck in the world now, is it? So when we look around, what's the commonality? What's the fallout of these decks disappearing? And I think one really large part of it is staples have returned. Used to, you had all these different kinds of decks that didn't need the same cards, but we've fallen into formats where hand traps really are necessary. And the second part is, I feel like we lost good structure decks. So let's backtrack a few years. Monarchs. Whew, what a time. Not everybody enjoyed this matchup, but I had a lot of fun watching them. So there's two different kinds of Monarchs, and the format went from Domain Monarchs to Extra Deck Monarchs back to Domain Monarchs. I actually really love formats that live long enough to fold back into themselves, where you build up all these counters to the original deck, and then the original deck ends up being the new counter once enough things have gone on, and the deck's kind of walking on eggshells. That is so fun to me. But Eric Christensen took Monarchs down into the WCQ, and it's quite the moment seeing a deck like that. And we also look maybe more towards ABCs, where, yes, Dimensional Barrier is in the format, somewhat of a staple, yet budget players could rip open 3 of these structure decks, toss in some gold and silver gadgets, toss in some Gamma Seals, and really just have at it and actually still top regionals within the format, because that's how good ABC was on its initial release. Now, yes, the format develops, Dimensional Barrier's a heck of a card to get over, and that's kind of when we start to see staples coming back. Pot of Desires was a highly debated card, yet how much of the top cut ended up using Pot of Desires? I think there was one where there was like 29 out of 32 duelists. Like, Pot of Desires became relatively a staple for topping for a bit there. And you also have Dimensional Barrier, undeniable power, especially heading in towards where Zodiacs are. So you just lose bit by bit those budget pieces, and then you get those rarity bumps on those cards. And then, boy, does that hurt. Ash Blossom is one that is a prime example of this. Starting out the gate at $70 to $80, rising up to its first YCS. If you were on that floor, you remember that being to $100 to $120 along with Diagram. What an insane time. And now you still see the super rare, a reprinted super rare, short printed by Konami at $30 freaking dollars. $90 for a playset of this card that many duelists will not play without. It's just pretty insane. And I think that's where we kind of lose it. Even Ghost Ogre kind of started this with the Ghost Girl hand traps. That secret rare was around $60 to $50 for a very long time. And then you had one reprint in the Gold Series and then the 10. And yet this card is so good and so desired for so long. It's still $10 for the Super. And it's seen formats without play, yet it resides there. We look to Ash Blossom, obviously kind of on a different level there, where it survived almost every single format and ends up in so many decks. And now we have a new one, Infinite Impermanence from Flood, where what would be a budget deck, I feel like, if this doesn't exist, is Altergeist, yet Infinite Impermanence does help it so much. You have Evenly Matched as well. Remember how long that actually just stayed at such a high price? And the Megatons still keep it towards 75 because it was one of the shorter print cards there. Maybe we're finding another culprit here with the short prints, huh? We got rarity bumps, we got short prints, we have structure decks not just being as good. We go to dinosaurs, and it's really well constructed, yet it doesn't really pierce too many YCS results. Yet there's that infamous Taco Bell mat on Moons' channel, where even Mega Capital G notices this. You have this guy that ripped open 3 dinosaur structures and tops a regional. Where are the moments like that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anymore? They seem to be non-existent, and that really hurts. It hurts to see this kind of just go away. These players that otherwise wouldn't be topping. And Layer of Darkness was a really, really well thought out, well constructed kind of archetype, but the field spell just didn't present itself right. Layer of Darkness was a flop because that field spell has no self-protection, where you have an entire archetype and deck really relying on that field spell staying there. And then you've kind of lowered the consistency as well. Terraforming's at 2, but even before that, Layer just, it didn't do what it needed to do. And if you were going to push it to work, I don't think you could do it really in a budget fashion at all. Infernoids was the closest, and Infernoids got bought out just for the anticipation of Layer of Darkness. I guess what I'm getting at is I miss budget decks. I miss seeing that top in a box. And I know a lot of people dislike it because you get tons of people using a similar strategy because it's viable and cheap. And so you play against that same matchup a lot, where other people really like diversity in formats. Domain Monarchs kind of choked a bit of diversity out of formats and was trying to stop extra deck cards. But you still had Burning Abyss, you still had Cosmo, you still had Pendulum decks flying around. I remember Billy making that brilliant fusion Pendulum deck where we almost topped one of the events, Columbus Origins. I day 2 barely missed out, and I didn't even get to playtest that deck because he was keeping it so under wraps. Like, there's so much innovation to be had in the game with diversity, and that's really cool. Even under something like Domain, it just takes kind of those greater minds to make it happen. Patrick Hoban with his extra deck Monarchs kind of kept it under wraps, where he used a Borg, and everyone's screaming OCG did it, but it's still there. It's still something really cool and diverse. So I think the greats during kind of linear formats tend to be the ones to diversify, and the average duelist doesn't see it as much. But there's tons of you out there grinding on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro, grinding on Dueling Book, and it's awesome to see. But I personally don't think that, you know, the structure decks are necessarily bad for the game. I love seeing when a budget strategy comes out that is viable, that can hammer it home, but it's kind of hard to mix something out that viable alongside with diversity. Like, how do you just push something in that's not going to take over? And you see that in the side sets too. Let's put in the Sky Striker engine. Now make that a structure deck. Can you imagine how rampant that would have been? So the price wall kind of keeps people away at first, but then the duelists that are already paying for a hotel, travel, getting out there, tend to slurp up these decks. And then you'll also have people, hey, are you going to the YCS? No, can I borrow that? Yeah, that happens a lot too. Like, people put their teams on their back, or they even friends, you know, from locals. If you're trustworthy, got a good reputation, tend to allow kind of like that to happen. And I feel like those side sets, those rarity bumps, staples overall, that's where the disappearance happens. And hand traps, I think, are largely to blame, where we've gotten into this rut of we need to play hand traps. True Draco kind of ignored that for a while because you played Card of Demise. You played a strategy that needed you to not play hand traps, and you even had counters like a Mono Iwado. So you did see that more recently, yet it just wasn't budget because Diagram needed Battles of Legends Light Revenge to become budget. So you had this highly expensive secret rare forever, and then you didn't really have too much of a time where that's a budget deck for people to play. And now it's budget, but is it piercing top cuts? Not really so much. You do see once in a while a regional, but then you need 3 card Demise, even with it not doing that hot. There's $45 in 3 cards, 3 Ignis Heat. There's $60 or $10 a piece. So you're now at $65 between 6 cards. You see where this is headed? Even though this deck doesn't need an extra deck similar to Domain Monarchs, it's it's just a rough age out here for building budget decks. It's hard. But thanks for watching. What do you guys think kind of happened to budget decks? Is it staples, rarity bumps? Is it just this combination of things? It's not just one thing? Yeah, I think it took multiple factors and kind of the disappearance of amazing structure decks for us to have. But I also think there's a little bit more to it. Like, there's just so much going on, and I really want to see it. So let me know in the comment section down below. I think Altergeist, personally, is the closest there, but to ignore the power of evenly matched, infinite impermanence, and Multi-Faker was, 30 for a playset for a while, that's still pretty affordable, and the rest of the deck, commons, rares, supers, easy to get, really budget. Meluseek was up there for a bit till its reprint. Like, it's still a really good deck, but then you gotta just stare down those evenly matched and impermanence and say, can you really ignore this power? Can you? Multi-Faker kind of really could use that, can't it? Like, I think DZ posted that evenly matched plus Multi-Faker combo that's just insane. It's so good, and you tear apart your opponent even going second. When you typically want to go first with that deck, right, you need kind of that power to push through a board. But again, subscribe if you haven't already, like the video if you enjoyed the conversation, and let me know what you think. I really do want to hear. And if you're a budget player, you're rocking out, once in a while we'll see one of those stun decks kind of pierce here or there, but not so much anymore. Fossil Dine has had its day, it feels like, almost. Thank you.